Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Another batch of Witchwood cards are coming up. The expansion's coming up as well on the 12th, less than a week from now. We also have the big card reveal, and that's going to happen pretty soon. It's probably going to be a video in a day or two. But for now, I want to review probably the last batch before the end batch of Witchwood cards. The end batch usually has quite a lot of filler cards, very few legendaries, so the cards in this one are going to be pretty interesting still. So, started off with Town Crier. We have a 1-mana 1/2 warrior card that draws a rush minion from your deck. Now, I have not been really impressed with the rush minions so far. I think they're all pretty good, but pretty good has traditionally not been good enough for constructed play. Now, this card is so insane that might change things up. There are a few rush minions that are maybe a bit better than the others, perhaps the warrior legendary rush minion. And this card just being a 1-mana 1/2, like okay statted 1-mana card with card draw, that's insane. That's actually super crazy. So the power level of this card is crazy, and if rush minions are better than I think, this card is just going to be auto-included in every single warrior deck. Now, warriors decks constructed, well, that's still up to debate. We'll see about that. We have Totem Cruncher. I think this card is pretty awful. It's a 4-mana 2/3 beast for whatever reason. It has taunt. The battle cry destroys all your totems, and you get +2/+2 for each one destroyed. So let's say you destroy one totem. Is that good? 4 mana, 4/5 taunt, but you lose a totem, which is worth at least a mana, in my opinion. No. So 2 totems. Maybe. 3 totems? Yeah, alright. But then you're destroying 3 totems. So the idea is, if you can make this card consistently good by destroying a bunch of totems, why wouldn't you just go in the other direction of, you have a deck that can reliably win the board with totems? Why not just play attack buffers and win the game that way, like Shaman has done traditionally, right? It doesn't seem like it meshes very well with how you typically play Shaman. Kind of goes against it, actually. So I'm not really too crazy about the card. That and with Warlock not having many changes in the next standard cycle, we're going to see a lot of people running Silence. This card gets annihilated if it gets silenced. Anything that has like a status effect, like Taunt for instance, and a self buff, both of those things in the same card, it's a massive silence risk. And Silence is going to be around. So this card's probably horrible. Then we have Countess Ashmore. This has been an extremely talked about card. People say it's basically like the new Curator. Now it costs 7 mana and gives you up to 3 cards. So in some ways, yes, it is the new Curator. Now, was Curator good? Yeah, it was alright. I played it in some constructed decks. Not very many other people did, though. And I have to say this card is probably quite a bit worse than Curator, but there are a few factors at play that need serious consideration. So this card is just worse than Curator, mostly because it doesn't have Taunt, but also because it doesn't give you a big board swingy card after you search for stuff. So, for instance, with Curator, it's a 7-mana 4/6 Taunt. It's less stats, but the taunt aspect is really important because with Countess, you're using 7 mana and not actually extending your survivability in that game. You're doing nothing that turn. You're playing this card to get more cards later. It's card draw, right? It's alright, I guess, in that way. Curator gives you a bit of a stall. Your opponent has to kill Curator, or maybe has to silence Curator. And typically with Curator, you're going to include Primordial Drake, which is an 8-mana huge taunt plus AoE effect. So if the Curator got like silenced, the Primordial Drake's probably going to stick. So you get that taunt wall effect. You get a board clear effect. You get a lot of stuff that helps you survive in the game. And that's important because these cards are obviously not going in aggro decks. They're going in control decks. And control decks really rely on that stuff to beat the other decks. Countess doesn't seem to have very much of that. When you play the card itself, that's a horrible turn. The main follow-up options are pretty limited. I think the best argument that I heard for Countess is playing it in like a control paladin deck where you might run some rush minions. You certainly could run a few lifesteal minions, and death rattles you can use Valinor, you can use Tyrion. So that's maybe alright, but honestly, I think this card is insanely overhyped. I don't know if it's terrible. I think it's probably just good, but good, again, doesn't tend to cut it for constructed play. So don't go crafting this right away because it's probably worse than you think. And we have a Book of Specters. Now, this card is absolutely batshit crazy. Now, if you think of the existing mage decks, you think of like a tempo mage, and the tempo mage is like half spells, half minions. Decks in the past have run 2 mana card draw that's basically cycle, like novice engineer stuff. So 2 mana, get like a crappy 1/1 and draw another card, just to thin out your deck because some cards are much more important than others, or you're trying to assemble some kind of combo conditions. So, there's a lot of value to cycling, and 2 mana cycle is pretty weak, but people have used it before. Now, for 3 mana to draw 2 cards is really good. So if your deck is 50% spells, 50% minions or weapons, Book of Specters is actually just worth playing. So if your deck is just full of spells, Book of Specters is still pretty good. So how crazy is this card going to be when your deck is not full of spells? Now, I understand Minion Mage is kind of like a joke, but my argument is you don't have to be playing that many minions for this card to be really good. The other aspect is, even if you'd put this in today's Tempo Mage decks, even if you only drew 1.5 cards on average, which in my opinion is still pretty valuable, you are thinning out your deck big time in order to draw Aluneth, the Mage legendary weapon, which is essentially the win condition against many decks. So, yeah, pretty good value. Search for your win condition. That's really good. Now, the upcoming versions of Mage, they're still yet to be determined. Tempo Mage is losing a lot of cards, enough so that it will not look the same. There might be some different variations of Tempo Mage. Tempo Mage has typically survived through the ages in Hearthstone, but I'm leaning more towards an elemental, control-y, or mid-range style Mage deck, in which case Book of Specters is absolutely ridiculous. I think this card is extremely high power level, guys. Don't think this card is bad and disenchant it when you first open any pack. Please don't do that. And we have some horror-looking things. We got Mossy Horror. We got a 6 mana 2/7 Battlecry, destroy all other minions with 2 or less attack. Now, we have this effect in a priest card that costs 4 mana, and that card sees some play, not a lot, but some play. And you could argue that, well, this costs 2 more mana, and you get a minion, so it's kind of like a 2 mana 2/7 plus draw a card. Wow, Kripp, that's really good. This card's really good. Now, in that perspective, yeah, okay, it's maybe all right. But I think in a more realistic perspective, that effect is worth so much less on turn 6 than it is on turn 4. On turn 4, your opponent's got like maybe a 1-drop, maybe a 2-drop, maybe a couple other drops, probably not a 3-drop because most aggro decks run fairly small minions. And maybe they have like, a 3 or a 4-drop, and you play the priest version, which costs 4, and it's just the effect, not the minion. And you kill all but 1 minion, and you saved yourself like, 6, 7, maybe up to 10 damage on the following turn. You marginalize the board a little bit. Pretty good effect. Now, take that same scenario, and let's say instead of holding the 4 mana removal, you're holding this card in your hand. Yes, you get the body of the minion, but turn 4 comes around, and your opponent still has those minions, and they hit you in the face. Then turn 5 comes around, they hit you in the face. Then turn 6 comes around, hit you in the face. Then you remove them. Well, you're basically dead at that point. Okay, this effect is just not very good when it's delayed that much into the game. It doesn't really matter that the body is decent at removing other aggro cards. If you're playing this and you're on like 8th life and it doesn't even remove everything your opponent's got in play, you're dead. So I think the consistency on this card is significantly worse than the options we've seen in the past. So it's probably not that good. But I don't know. Killing a lot of small minions has traditionally been pretty good, so I'm not going to write it off completely. Then we got Festeroot Hulk, 5 mana 2/7. After a friendly minion attacks, gain +1 attack. This is a warrior card. This is another warrior card that seems to lead people to be playing some kind of like mid-range warrior. Now, there's a lot of rush cards that kind of support that playstyle. It doesn't seem to me like it'll survive the current meta of Control Warlock, which is super control, and Aggro Pally, which is hyper aggro. I don't see a deck, especially Warrior, getting in the middle of those two and actually beating either. But I could be wrong. And this card might see some play if you have, it synergizes Wind Fury, right? All those amazing Wind Fury minions, right? I don't know. It's a pretty well-statted card. The way I think of it is you play this when you're winning on the board. You attack with two things, the 5-mana 4/7 that poses a big threat on a following turn. Is that good? Yeah, that's pretty good. That's a mid-range warrior deck, though. So, not optimistic about that one. We have a neutral epic, Splitting Festeroot. This is probably one of the most interesting cards in this expansion, even though it may not look like much. So it's an 8-mana 4/4, and you summon 2/2/2 Splitting Saplings. Okay, so this is a 4/4, and this dies, and you get 2/2/2s. Each time those 2/2s die, you get 2 1/1s. So basically, it comes in 3 phases, and each phase has 4/4 worth of stats. So this is essentially 12/12 worth of stats across 7 minions in one. That's really good. Okay, minions that are really hard to remove are really powerful in Hearthstone. The main problem that I have is decks that take advantage of that typically can't use an 8-mana cost card. So those things are super conflicting. We have this extremely high power level card that is, very, very strong in terms of pushing presence on the board, which is one of the most important things in Hearthstone. But the decks that want to play a card like that typically can't afford to run an 8-mana card. So these things are really at odds, and it should be pretty interesting to see on which side it ends up. And we have a very hyped up Rogue Legendary Tess Greymane, the 8-mana 6/6. I call this Small Saran, but it's a little bit more than that, because so the battle cry, it replays every card from another class that you've played this game. Now, there are a few issues with that. The main issue is that Mean Streets of Gadgetzan is rotating out of Standard. Karazhan is rotating out of Standard. So a lot of the playing cards from other classes that Rogue has done recently is no longer going to be possible. Rogue is getting new mechanics to do this, but it's going to be in a different style, and it's still going to be pretty slow. So it's going to be a low-tempo type of Rogue deck. High value, low tempo Rogue. That already has me very skeptic about the idea. The interesting thing is, it's not just spells. Like, when I first looked at this card, I'm like, yeah, it's just like Yogg-Saron. You play a bunch of spells. But it has minions as well. And the minions are obviously much better than the spells. But you don't get to choose. When you're getting cards from your opponent's classes, yeah, sometimes they're spells, sometimes they're minions. Sometimes it's an even split. And sometimes, maybe you're playing against a priest or something, you get some big minions, and then you get like Shadow or Death, and then Tess plays the big minions, and then Shadow or Death's the big minions. So it's total madness. Now, I think this card is probably on a low power level, but there's a very good chance I'm wrong about that. I just feel it doesn't mesh very well with what Rogue does best, and unless we see a lot more cards that take cards from your opponent's class and plays them, it's going to be a bit off. The other issue is your opponent might be a rogue. So you might not be able to get any value out of this card. So the interesting thing is, for this card to work, I think Rogue needs some very powerful tempo cards to support the fact that you'll be playing low tempo cards to feed Tess Greymane. Now, if Rogue has that powerful of tempo cards, people are probably just going to play Tempo Rogue. If you're playing the take cards from your opponent's class Tess Greymane Rogue, and other people are playing Tempo Rogue will absolutely completely shit on you. So there's a lot of issues here with this card, but overall, it's a fun little one. One card to support it that I actually think is probably better than Legendary, the next one here, Blink Fox. 3 mana, 3/3 beast, battle cry, add a random card to your hand. Yeah. That card's insane. This card's like super insane. You can play this in Tempo Rogue just fine. Tempo Rogue has traditionally been play the traditional high tempo Rogue cards with a few new ones and have just extremely powerful early game turns. and mix in some cards that make it so you don't run out of cards abruptly on turn 6, 7, 8. This card is perfect for that. It's pretty good tempo, it gives you more juice afterwards, and it's a 3-mana card, which as a rogue you can never get enough of. It's ridiculously good. I think Blink Fox is possibly the best rogue card in this expansion, and it might be the card that plagues Arena. There's some chance that you'll see rogues, depending on how they do the occurrence boosts of this expansion. We don't know how they're going to do that, or if they're going to do that, because the increased occurrence of new expansion cards has not been in place since they changed how drafting worked completely. So we don't know how that's going to work, but if we have a system like that, like we've had in the past, you might see rogues with like 6 Blink Foxes in Arena, and you are not going to win against most of those rogue decks. So we'll see about that aspect of it. Then we had a Mage legendary, Archmage Arugal. 2-mana 2/2, whenever you draw a minion, add a copy of it to your hand. So it works very well with the card showed earlier that draws 3 cards and discards all the spells drawn. The idea is you don't have to play entirely minions, but if you just play fewer spells than you would normally, you start to have a lot of synergy between these cards. I think one of the best ways to do it is with elementals, keeping in mind that the Death Knight cards are also not spells, so they work with the card draw variation. It all works together pretty well. I see this as being a pretty damn strong archetype. And speaking of which, the last card I want to show you guys today is another elemental for Mage. The Bonfire Elemental, 5-mana 5/5, and if you played an elemental last turn, draw a card. So this card is pretty bad. I don't know why it's rare quality, but if you're playing Mage and you're playing elementals, why not, right? It might be better to use a card like this than like Arcane Intellect, and then you're playing more minions. So standalone, pretty crappy card, but in the specific deck that I've just mentioned, it's probably just good enough. So that does it for now. Hope you guys enjoyed another review, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Well, hi there. Thank you for watching yet another Kripparrian video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did enjoy it, and if you do want to see more, and if you haven't already subscribed, why not subscribe? It's there. It's free. You get to see more of me. But these days, actually, the subscribe button doesn't necessarily do what it did in the past. You might not get notifications for all the videos, especially since we do multiple uploads a day. So if you have already subscribed and you must see every single Kripparrian video, well, you can hit the notification thing, hit that bell sign, and you absolutely will get notified when the next video comes out. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one.